Oh, hi babe. What are you in the mood for tonight? I was thinking maybe we head down to a really dirty underground sewer tunnel and we could have a picnic of those little plastic trash bins you can find at Target. And then if things start to heat up, you could open up my stomach and play around with my organs a little bit. Now I know what you're thinking. Probably just, huh? That seems to be the future that David Cronenberg envisions. Is that what you want for our youth, to consume plastic and get off exclusively on pain? Moving further and further away from what it truly means to be human? These are just some of the hard-hitting questions that are posed in Crimes of the Future. I know, it's very disturbing, but don't shoot the messenger, I'm just here to talk about it. As always, the first half of my review will be spoiler-free, so don't fret if you haven't seen the movie yet. Actually, majority of this review is kind of gonna be spoiler-free, and then at the very end we'll talk about the themes of the movie, and then we'll hit on like all the relevant plot points that pertain to the themes. I also want to talk about some of the behind the scenes stuff that I've researched, so mainly just interviews with Cronenberg as well as the two leads. There will be timestamps linked down below because I find the interviews and behind the scenes stuff really interesting, but I can understand if you just want to skip to the review. So let's start out with some info on David Cronenberg. Most of you guys probably know him as the master of body horror, and he was kind of at the peak of his career in the 80s with movies like Videodrome and the remake of The Fly starring Jeff Goldblum. Before this year, he had taken something crazy like an 8 to 10 year hiatus, finally returning to cinema at the age of now 79 with Crimes of the Future. But there's so much more to him. I found a really great article on this website called That Shelf. A writer named Jason Gorber was lucky enough to interview Cronenberg at Cannes, and so I'm just gonna break down the parts of the interview that I found most interesting. He was asked how he feels about being the proclaimed master of body horror, and his response was not what I expected. He actually thinks it's an oversimplification and said, "I never used the expression body horror. I'd never heard of it until I was called it by somebody." And he says that he thinks the phrase ends up being lazy because is that really what this is? And they don't end up unpacking the rest of that answer in the article, and I kind of wish they would have. I think some artists just really don't want to be put into any kind of a box, although later on he does say that it is lovely to be an adjective. There are a lot of different words apparently for something being Cronenbergian or Cronenberg-esque. But he obviously has a clear stamp on what he does. He is one of the least shy filmmakers when it comes to exploring the human body in grotesque ways. I think that generalizing his work as Cronenbergian rather than as, you know, being masterful at body horror is more suitable because there is so much more to it than that, and we will get into that later. Hello, sorry, just need to pop in really quick. Something that I also wish that I referenced is the fact that there is pretty much a whole episode of Rick and Morty where Rick kind of Cronenbergs the entire world, and they do use that word in the show.
Boy, Morty, I really Cronenberged the world up, didn't I? We got a whole planet of Cronenbergs walking around down there, Morty.
So you can kind of see how the Cronenberg effect sort of ripples outwards into other genres as well. Another interesting section of the article was when Gorber asked him if he sees himself reflected in the work of his children. And he said he does, but he still specifies that they are very much still their own people. But it turns out that David and Brandon are exclusively the first people that ever get to see their movies. Brandon has another movie that's in the editing phase of production right now, and David got to be the first to see it, and vice versa. So as father and son, and as filmmakers, they are very involved in each other's work. The last portion from that article that I wanted to kind of unpack is that Cronenberg was asked what made him take the leap to decide to start making films. It turns out that he had friends in university who made their own film, and this made something connect for him. He said, "To see people I knew in a real movie was impossible. How did that happen? They weren't stars from another planet, and that immediately meant filmmaking was accessible to me." I can definitely relate to that because the crew that I make short horror films with, they are people that I went to school with. They really inspired me to just do the damn thing because they graduated a year before I did, and I saw them just out here doing it. Would you look at that, David? We're so similar. We should just be besties. But then, to top it all off at the end of this article, Grober basically asked him, "So what of your friend, you know, 6 decades later?" 6 decades later, David Sector no longer alive. But wait, and David Cronenberg very much is. And that's how the article ends. That's nuts. But it's my kind of morbid humor, so anyways. On the same site, interviewed by the same person, there are some other cast interviews that I want to get into and share some fun facts. I loved the interview that they did with Viggo Mortensen especially because I feel like I got to learn even more about Cronenberg as a director and person. But something that was wildly shocking to me here was that apparently Cronenberg doesn't do much planning ahead. He doesn't storyboard or rehearse because he trusts his ability to cast and what what that cast will bring so much that they just sort of show up and go for it. That's wild to me because when you watch his movies, it's clear that the cast is kind of allowed to run with it, but it seems like it was influenced by direction. There's such a distinct tone to his movies that is always very consistent throughout. And I always assumed that consistency always came from planning ahead. I'm learning a lot about that right now, and we're trying to plan down every last thing that we possibly can. Of course, maybe he's onto something because anything that can go wrong on a film set definitely will go wrong, and I promise you nothing will ever go according to plan. It's all about your ability to creatively adapt. But how nice for the actors that they really have the space to just explore their craft. So now moving on to the interview with Leah Seydoux. And same dude interviewing her, Jason Gorber, you lucky son of a bitch. Can you tell I'm jealous? Am I being too obvious? It seems like this movie was especially intimate and meaningful for her because she got to explore her artistry as an actress in a very meta way. She says, "For me, when I act with my body, but I also act with my soul, and that's exactly what the film is about, where you give your body and soul. It's true that I think that as an artist, you have to put your flesh on the table." And there is more to discuss concerning this when we get to the theme portion of this video, but what I will say to that for now is that, again, I just think it's so cool that these actors were given that space. Regardless of if this kind of provocative artwork is for you, I think that anyone can respect that all these people just put it all out there in the name of expression. She also has some really interesting, very sex-positive answers that I want to talk about, but we'll save that for when I really get into the movie's themes. And I know that you're probably dying to get to my thoughts on the film already, but there is just one more thing I want to mention. I did watch the original Crimes of the Future from 1970, which I didn't even know existed before yesterday, and to be honest, I kind of just had it on in the background. It became very clear to me in the first couple of minutes that I was going to be very bored by the movie, but I did finish it. I was just kind of playing games on my phone the whole time, and it's gorgeous. You can kind of tell that from day one, Cronenberg just knew how to make a good-looking movie. I believe that he wrote, shot, edited it, just like everything all himself with that one. And from what I saw, there are some elements that do seem a little bit disturbing, but a lot of the comments that he gets on Letterboxd are that he really needs more provocative imagery and gore to kind of fully flesh out his ideas, which is so interesting and obviously why that kind of became his signature. The whole thing is free to watch on YouTube. I think it is only an hour long, so go for it, I guess, but I don't really recommend it. I found it pretty boring. So anyway, let's just talk about the movie at hand today, Crimes of the Future from 2022. Initial thoughts were just kind of bleh. I am not a body horror fan, okay? That's not generally my thing, but I think that this was the first time that I felt so drawn in by it. I started to actually feel a little bit woozy in the theater, partially because I'm getting back into really good shape right now, and it seems like no matter how much I eat, I am always hungry. Or maybe it's just a tapeworm, who knows? But it was the strangest thing. I'd eaten dinner right before I'd gone to the movies, but I was already starting to get hungry again, but at the same time, all the visuals in the movie kind of made me want to throw up. The movie literally had me feeling like stew.
I'm feeling woozy, yeah!
I seriously was sitting there just thinking, what is wrong with me? Because I didn't even smoke either. I got blasted when I saw Men, and that was a mistake. That just made me want to like unzip my skin suit and just step right out of it. So with this one, I was like, yeah, we're gonna play it safe. I'm gonna go in sober. And even so, I was about 3/4 of the way into the movie, and then I was thinking, why is my head kind of like spinning right now? It was giving me a stomachache from being nauseous, but I was also hungry. My body was just a wreck. And I'm not trying to overhype it because generally I think that I am less equipped to handle body horror than most horror fans, but this movie is insanely provocative, and I don't think you're gonna catch anybody in the audience just sort of happily sitting there and eating their popcorn and candy like yum yum yum. And it's not just the parts of this movie that contain body horror, it's also all of the food. It's a dystopian future where humans have kind of ruined everything, and so their resources are super limited. And I have to commend the production team because all the choices that they made for the looks of the food and everything else was just fantastic. It was nasty, nasty, nasty. And I think I'm just a sensitive person. I eat mostly plant-based because I just have a terrible aversion to raw meats and stuff. I can't drink tequila, just smelling it makes me gag. Can't listen to or watch other people throw up because that will also trigger my gag reflex. So the scenes of people eating literally anything in this movie because it was all this weird futuristic food and the way that they had to eat too, ooh, we'll get into that. It was all a lot to handle for me, a lot. All the sexual scenes were also pretty uncomfortable for the most part because they really push the boundaries and they completely redefine what sex is. They just push the boundaries with everything in this movie. Even the smallest character tics would make me uncomfortable. Like Viggo Mortensen's character had throat issues, so when he would talk or eat, even that was really getting under my skin. And I think that that was the point, so really this is all a compliment. If it sounds like I'm speaking down on that or negatively about it, it's because I'm not the target audience, okay? I hate it. But even I can admit that they were very successful in getting me to think pretty deeply about all the ideas that they presented. The point was to be uncomfortable, but just keep hanging tight. I'm still not to the full thematic breakdown yet. Just gonna go over some of the technical aspects of the film and then we will get down and dirty and juicy with some spoilers of this movie. Visually, it's a very interesting movie. The production design is very bare and understated, and yet you know exactly what kind of world you're in. Like the design or the lack thereof really is what gets you so immersed into the world. As I already mentioned before, the food is also pretty much exactly the kind of dystopian gruel you would expect to see. One of the biggest standouts of the production design though was definitely all of the weird giant contraptions that they would use to accomplish just daily human things. They have this weird high-tech intuitive bed that reads a person's pain triggers and moves them in their sleep. And because in this universe the human body has evolved in super funky ways, they have this eating aid chair that kind of wiggles the body around to most effectively try to get the food into your body. The most interesting of them all by far is definitely the autopsy machine that the leads use to perform with, but I won't get too into that now. And speaking of the leads, all the acting in this movie is incredible, but you knew that. You've seen the cast. Kristen Stewart stole every single scene that she was in. That woman is so talented and her character was such a little weirdo that even in the wide shots where another character would be talking, I'd be looking at her. So bravo, you little weirdo. Lea Seydoux and Viggo Mortensen also just had phenomenal chemistry. This is a universe where everybody is hypersexual and it's normal to just kind of engage in sexual activities in the middle of a party, just or out on the street, and everyone is kind of doing everyone else. So the fact that their relationship in particular stood out so much, I think is really saying something. So big claps all around. I'm glad that Cronenberg seemed to give them the freedom to make the characters what they wanted them to be. In terms of cinematography, Cronenberg definitely also has that down. Even without a storyboard, apparently he knows how to make a really good looking film. It is weird though, at times the framing is really uncomfortable because it's just not standard to what we normally see. The lighting is also strange, not bad, but definitely not my favorite style. Can't really put my finger on it, but the lighting felt a little bit flat, but I guess that was kind of contributing to the general aura of this dystopian future. Overall, it's a good looking movie, great production design. You already know the gore and all that was good. Also, I know that I kept going on about how woozy I was getting, but really there is not as much gore in this movie as you would think. They really get into your head more with the concepts that just so happen to be presented through the gore sometimes. Though I will say that for general audiences, like just for general movie fans, if you're new to this channel and you're not a big horror person or something, maybe not for you. The only reason I'm saying, oh, it's actually not quite as crazy as I would lead you to believe is because if you're just a general horror fan, you consume a lot of horror, it's not going to be quite as much in comparison to say something like Saw. To wrap up the spoiler-free portion of this video though, do I recommend this movie? Listen, I don't know. This is a prime example of a situation where you need to decide that for yourself because it all depends on how much gore you can handle and if you can handle your perceptions of reality getting all fucked up. I only gave it 3.5 stars, and to be fair, it might deserve more than that because I do think it was a genuinely very profound movie. It does exactly what it wants to do. It makes some phenomenal points that get your head just absolutely swirling, great body horror. But at the same time, I also have a few negatives. The pacing was just a little bit off. I was thoroughly intrigued by this movie, even though it's not super plot heavy, but towards the end of the film, I was checking the time, admittedly. And really the only other negative is that I don't think I'll ever watch this again. It's a very subjective thing, but this movie does not have rewatchability to me at all, because I could make most of the same points about Midsommar. You know, there's really gruesome body horror conceptually, it just really messes with your perception of reality. But with Midsommar, that movie is gonna be infinitely rewatchable. I will rewatch it until I die. Crimes of the Future does not hit me in that way. I don't feel the need to ever watch it again. So if you haven't seen the movie, take all of that, absorb it, and and do with it what you will. So you are no longer safe for spoilers. I'm gonna start getting into kind of a, well, not a traditional plot breakdown. As I mentioned, I really just want to talk about the themes of this movie and how some of the plot points pertain to those themes. But to briefly go over the story so you know what's up, as the human species adapts to a synthetic environment, the body undergoes new transformations and mutations. Accompanied by his partner, celebrity performance artist Saul Tenser showcases the metamorphosis of his organs. Meanwhile, a mysterious group tries to use Saul's notoriety to shed light on the next phase of human evolution. And what is the next phase of human evolution? Eating plastic, basically. It's all about surrendering to the toxicity that humans have created, accepting our fate, consuming the only remaining abundant resource. Fascinating, like truly a concept for the ages. Especially now that microplastics are literally everywhere. This movie hits a little bit too close to home. Essentially, this beautiful world that we live in is starting to be consumed by plastic, and Cronenberg said, no, what if we flip the script and we become the ones to consume the plastic? Which sounds terrible, awful, inhuman even. But with the direction that the world is currently going, is it so far off? It's such a simple concept on paper, right? Humans evolved to the point where their digestive systems pretty much exclusively digest plastic. But they presented it in the most thought-provoking way possible. They explored the natural resistance to such an idea. A mother kills her child. Apparently the first child born in the world with a digestive system fully capable of digesting plastic without requiring any surgical corrections. And his father is this sort of underground cult leader who is trying to pave the way for this new world order. And when you watch the movie, you can't help but get the sense that if this were to happen in this universe, the one that you and I live in, it does feel like a pretty realistic portrayal of giving birth to that new world order. So otherworldly and yet hit so close to home. I mean, how do they do it? Well, I actually do have a theory on that. Somehow the storyline of these lead protagonists, these performance artists, was intertwined so perfectly with these themes. I'm gonna go back to the interview with Mortensen because there is another theme of this movie that we haven't even touched on yet, so I'm just gonna directly quote him here. Yes, it's a film noir story, yes, it deals with the body in a particular way, but it's also very tender, unexpected maybe, or unusual love story that's at the heart of it. This relationship of mutual respect and true, deeply felt affection between Leah's character and mine. It's very beautiful, and David told that very well as a director. I think that because we have this tender love story, it then becomes this really intimate exploration of someone coming to terms with the changes in their body, and therefore the evolution of the entire human race. Brilliant. Cronenberg said, okay, so generally the point is that humans evolved to the point where they think eating plastic is, ooh, good, yummy, yummy. But how do we humanize that, bring the audience in along for the ride? Love. The most human thing of all. I'm also realizing now that this is a little bit of a pattern. I haven't seen too many Cronenberg movies, but in The Fly in 1986, right? That is also a very tender love story. That's kind of like the basis of the whole plot, actually. So very interesting. I love that his movies are so grotesque, and yet they're always just like grounded in love. How cute. And that's beautiful because at the end of the day, if we start eating little plastic trash bins instead of sandwiches, we still want to love and be loved and have sex. And sex is also very much explored in this movie. So back to Leah Sado's interview, she was talking about what it's like to separate herself from her characters and how she doesn't really. She said, but what's great is that cinema allows you to just go and just whatever. You have a frame, and within that you can safely let yourself go. I think we all want that, and sex is also about that. Sex is also something that you let go. It's a relief, but we all want that. But at the same time, we want to control our lives. Directly after that, he said, is sex a performance? And she said, yeah. I think it's interesting that her answer was just simply an enthusiastic yeah, because it is, and as much as you get lost in it, it's still a show, let's be honest. And again, I just have to reiterate how amazing it is that this movie is so raw and so sex positive. Not just within the universe of the movie, but that seemingly it was kind of a meta experience, as I mentioned, for these actors to just let go and kind of explore. Even if a lot of the visuals were not for me, I still think that it's iconic that that Cronenberg just threw all caution to the wind and made this movie sexy as hell. Definitely a redefined version of sex, but nonetheless. However bizarre it ends up being on camera, it still grounds the film in something incredibly relatable and human. One of the other elements to this movie is that there is a huge resistance to humans evolving beyond what is human. But if we're still having sex, we're still human, baby. That's what Cronenberg seems to think. A little reminiscent on fighting for basic human rights like gay marriage, interracial marriage, and how a lot of people were saying, oh, that's not natural, it's not human. Evolution is weird and painful, and it'll always be met with resistance, but we will always survive. And this movie for the longest time was so dark and foreboding, and there didn't really seem to be much hope until literally the very last frame. It's when Saul finally surrenders to his body and he stops trying to force feed himself, you know, natural food, and he consumes the plastic. The chair goes still, there's a smile on his face, he seems to be finally at peace. The only constant is change, so don't fight it, baby. And that's all they wrote for Crimes of the Future. I'm sure that we're going to be having a lot of very weird conversations about it down below. I didn't get nearly as in-depth as I probably could have in this review. Like, I could have just talked for ages and ages about this one, but really the purpose of giving this movie its own solo review is that I just wanted to start the conversation. This is a movie that demands a lot of discussion. There are a lot of ways you can interpret things. I've seen a lot of really great reviews online and on Letterboxd, from Cannes, etc. So put all your thoughts and theories into a comment. I would love to see it. Give this video a like if you liked it. Click subscribe if you're new, and also click the notification bell so that you don't miss the next video. And if you'd like access to my bonus content, my Patreon will be linked down below. A huge thank you as always to these people for keeping my lights on. If you'd like to support me in that way, then we would love to have you over there. But I'm gonna head out, so don't eat plastic, stay sexy, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!